World War III is approaching. War of Ideas. The possibility of a Third World War, whether in the South China Sea or in Eastern Europe, is increasing day by day. More worrying, however, is the internal battle of ideas. During the Cold War, the contrast between the American way of life, individual freedom and free trade, and the Soviet system, the copy of political control and state control of the economy, made it easier for Americans to attack our targets and enemies. The same goes for our country's attitude towards Hitler's Germany and Imperial Japan. But as citizens debate whether ideals such as free trade, limited government, and personal freedom are worth defending, this dynamic is not applicable in America today. Our chances of defeating Vladimir Putin's Russia or Xi Jinping's China in the next World War will depend on national consensus that our ideas are better than theirs. It's hard to imagine that this merger will happen anytime soon. Yet most Americans fight for a free Ukraine and learn about Chinese oppression on their own through the media. The attitude of the country towards the enemy can be changed in the right direction. But without a greater national understanding of American power, we will not have the internal unity necessary to win this war. We predicted the war and were wrong. America immediately assumed that the next World War would be a conflict. When the U.S. military killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020, people tweeted #WW3 and predicted the results. A few months later, questions continued to spread about tensions on the Sino-Indian border. Most Americans today forget that these events happened. This begs the question, why are we so eager to make decisions about future world conflicts, and why are we so wrong? Military entertainment complexes, too. Narrative has permeated our culture since World War II. From movies like Top Gun to movies like Call of Duty, Americans don't just want war, we pay a lot of money to think about it. Our fascination with war makes us think about its consequences. However, 3. The next major world conflict will not be fought by trench warfare, lightning strikes, or other familiar forms of world warfare. It will be countered or avoided with cyber tactics and financial penalties. There will be no war. Since the United States is no longer a world superpower, Washington has taken steps to ensure it can maintain its authority and support the world's freedom. But this information is important in itself and ultimately showed that there would be no Third World War. Why? Who would have guessed that with China rising, America would want to go to war with another power, let alone win? Instead, the U.S. may seek war to maintain its power as it tries to balance its other international commitments, such as the war in Ukraine. America is not free. The idea of joining a global war supports this argument. Remember that politicians say otherwise. 3. While World War II is unlikely, the alternative may not be better, especially as the country's domestic politics have been subject to many cultural and social conflicts. Right, instead, the United States should focus on its own country and meet its own domestic needs first. China's war campaign. 3. I fear the outbreak of World War II and believe that its consequences will be more devastating than most Americans imagine. A tougher approach to China has led to tensions and widespread rhetoric in the U.S. The United States and Xi Jinping became increasingly aggressive towards Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. If China invades the territory of our Pacific allies, the United States will certainly intervene. But it's not the prospect of normal war that worries me the most. The problem is that if China begins to fail, it could escalate, causing global damage to public space and energy. China has been developing anti-satellite missiles for decades, resulting in the launch of a satellite in 2007 that created one of the largest pieces of space debris ever created. In a conflict, this attack could disrupt many satellites, resulting in the loss of GPS, communications, online banking, and other critical infrastructure that could harm the U.S. economy and quality of life. China has long developed nuclear weapons that can neutralize the nuclear weapons of the United States and its allies. If the grid isn't working properly, keeping food stores running and keeping gas flowing to gas stations will be a daunting task. Even scaled-down versions of these attacks can affect the lives of civilians thousands of miles from the front lines. Considering the strong American army, China can only win with these negative attacks and turn this war into a war of Chinese power. 3. World War II is coming, Putin's ally, totally crazy West, warns. Military aid to Ukraine raises hopes for international conflict, Russia's ex-president. 3. Putin's ally, Dmitry Medvedev, now vice-chairman of the Russian Security Council, said World War III was rapidly approaching and that Russia's invasion of Ukraine would continue. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the new security agreement for the country from the Group of Seven, but warned that it would not change NATO membership. Mr. Medvedev said, "The madman in the West cannot do anything else. It is actually a dead end." What does all this mean for us? Everything is clean. Special military operations will achieve the same goal. The G7 nations will announce a long-term security package for Ukraine to help end the war at the NATO meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania, later today. All members of the G7 must sign a statement outlining how the Allies will support Ukraine next year to end the war and deter Ukraine and prevent future attacks, the British government said in a statement from the White House. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak added, "As Ukraine continues to make progress in its offensive and the inaction of the Russian military is beginning to affect Putin's front lines, we are strengthening our plans to defend Ukraine in the long term." Zelensky said after talks with NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg of the G7 agreement. He stated that he should not replace NATO but see that there is a security that guarantees the path to integration, because no clear time has been set for his country to participate in integration. The previous terms of the swap have been combined, meet President Joe Biden, and participation is for respect. But Ukraine also deserves respect. Now we have received signs that some words were spoken on the way to Vilnius without Ukraine. I want to say that this statement is not about Ukraine's membership, but about the invitation to join NATO, he said. It is unprecedented and absurd that Ukraine is not given an appointment for both invitation and entry. Even when inviting Ukraine at the same time, ambiguous words about conditions were added, Zelensky said. I want to say that this statement is not about Ukraine's membership, but about the invitation to join NATO, he said. No invitation or access to Ukraine was planned, which was unprecedented and unsuccessful. Even when inviting Ukraine at the same time, ambiguous words about conditions were added, Zelensky said. This means that in negotiations with Russia there is time left to negotiate for Ukraine's NATO membership, he said. For Russia, this is an incentive to continue its terror. By the way, USA. After Zelensky's tirade, U.S. National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan issued a mild warning to Kyiv. Ukrainian anti-corruption activist Daria Kaleniuk is angered by allegations that the president fears Russia and has not set a time for Ukraine to join the Brussels-based membership. The United States has stepped up to provide massive resources to help ensure that Ukraine's brave soldiers have ammunition, anti-aircraft, infantry, combat vehicles, equipment mining, and more so that they can operate effectively. Prevent Russia attack and return. I think the American people deserve acknowledgement from the U.S. government and the rest of the world for their willingness to come forward. Sullivan criticized Zelensky for criticizing his Western allies, saying that some of the accusations against the United States were untrue and unfair. In a respected German opinion, the United States is by far the largest donor of military aid to Ukraine, sending more than $46 billion in equipment to Kyiv. Last week, Mr. Medvedev argued that the West should not oppose Russia's aggression in Ukraine or face nuclear war, epidemics and famine that could kill millions. He said Putin would not accept any decision that did not realize or kill a democratic Ukraine. You don't need to be visionary to realize that the discussion phase will take a very long time. Medvedev, the 70-year-old head of Putin's Security Council, said the struggle will continue for years. The only solution to this problem is the Third War. Success was not guaranteed, as it was after the World War. In most cases, there will be no winners at all. Also called on Russia to suspend relations with Britain and other countries that support Kyiv. It would be better to temporarily suspend or at least temporarily reduce relations with countries such as Finland and Poland, the Baltic states and of course the United Kingdom. 57-year-old Medvedev wants to shake it up or go back to the Kremlin when staying in power was too painful. Medvedev was Russia's president from 2008 to 2012 and is the country's longest-serving prime minister.